The topic today is a revision of an article I wrote just a few weeks back. It was an article that I reviewed a few studies focused on AI adoption in 24. Though when I was preparing this talk, I realized one thing. There were some data that I overlooked, so I made a revision. Before we go into detail, there's a few definitions I thought that we could make sure we're on the same page. Those studies, they focus on generative AI. Most of them talked about apps like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, Midjourney, instead of talking about the model underneath. Here's another term that mentioned very often in the study. It's adoption. May I ask how many product people there are in this room? Oh, okay. Thank you. So including me, we probably would have 10 different definitions of adoption and product market fit. This curve, a lot of you probably have seen it. It's essentially the adoption distribution. So if you got all the distribution filled, then that means that your product has already reached the mass market adoption. But the chasm there, it's a cliff, a gap that you will need to pass in order for your product to be qualified as that the product has found product market fit. Any users you have acquired before that, they're all called early adopters. So it's good that we have definitions, but let's put it in context. Let's see how it look like when we look at real life data. So you have Google search. We all know that is the world's biggest digital product. And so Google alone, it has about 3 billion unique monthly visits last month. And the other thing that we all know is apps like ChatGPT or like Claude. They're looking to get some Google's market share. Not to mention just a few days back, I don't know how many of you already played with it. ChatGPT just released the Search GPT. So if we are to do a proper comparison between the ChatGPT's market share versus the Google's market share, then in theory, that we should understand what is the monthly unique user count of ChatGPT. Unfortunately, that is not a data that you can easily get. You do have some numbers. You have the lower range 50 mil and the higher range 200 mil. It depends on who you ask and what data source that you look at. If we agree with just look at a range of adoptions, then it would be range between the lower end. We're looking at the adoption rate that's about 0.2% of the market. And the higher end of the ChatGPT adoption rate is about 3%. So it's good that we have data. But how does it feel like in real life? I know a lot of people in this room probably feel like everyone around you are using ChatGPT right now. Everyone around you are talking about AI. But how often that you feel this way? When was the last time that you thought, okay, I will use ChatGPT to help me with this? And you started to prompt, you started to tweak, and then after 10 minutes, you realize that you probably have already done the job if you did it yourself 10 minutes ago. This is something that a lot of people feel when they use ChatGPT. I need to be fair here. I'm not saying that I haven't got a mass productivity boost when I use ChatGPT. To be fair, if in the past it took me a full week to write an article, right now it took me only 2 days to gather information, clean up, to put down a few paragraphs and section, and then to roll it out. That cut my production day into half. But still, a lot of time, it's about to understand where I feel, oh, okay, this is the best it could work, and I should take over from ChatGPT. So generally speaking, for majority of the users, it's still a tool and a lot of times the source of frustrations. That's why there's another article I wrote where I said 99% of AI apps haven't found its product market fit. As soon as I released this article, I got quite a lot of comments, but also a lot of complaints. They were like, what do you mean they don't have the product market fit? I keep using ChatGPT every day. So I know that might be the case. But the point is, majority of users still found that kind of frustration after they signed up to any new apps. And compared to normal things that we use day in, day out, but not generative AI. I know this might be a bold claim, so let me show you how does it look when a product has found their product market fit. Slightly ancient. So this is the graphic showing you the light technology evolution. Every line you see there is one light technology evolvement, and then the y-axis on the side, efficiency, how much energy you put into that light source and have how much light produced. So 300 years ago, only rich and noble will be able to use candle because it was too expensive for normal folk like me to use candle every day. But when oil pipeline was invented and more people start to use kerosene or gas as a lighting source, and you have light bulb and then you have LED, and only when the efficiency finally passed the efforts that put into light source, that's when light has found its product market fit. And that's when the adoption started. So now we have already covered that generative AI is still looking for its product market fit. And history show that why adoption will only comes after a few technology evolution and once the technology is matured. So let's have a look at what the scholars have to say about the current adoption rate. Essentially, what it's doing is comparing the AI adoption rate today with the PC adoption rate back in the 1980s. The first conclusion is that it took only 2 years for 40% of the US market to adopt AI. That's quite a bold claim, to be honest. And I think for us to understand where the claim comes from, then we need to have a look at this graphic on everyone's right-hand side, that there are 3 groups that will, I can still hear you probably. This group, the one with dark gray, is essentially everyone and those who use AI every day and have already been treated as part of their workforce. The middle here, that's the group of people who probably use AI once every week or once every 2 weeks. And the last three are those who have used AI once. That means since ChatGPT released in 22, they have at least tried ChatGPT. And that's how they got to 40%. What I think makes more sense is to only include those group of people who have already added GAI tools to become part of their day-to-day workflow. And only that group will qualify as early adopters. It's probably lower range, 10%, higher range, 15%. Although, if some of you still remember the data I just talked about earlier, I said about 3%. This is still about 3 times or 5 times of the information I claim. Keep in mind that this study focused in the US market, and most of the GAI apps rollout started with US market. A majority of the training content is also in English. it makes sense for the US population to adopt GAI apps much faster than in other countries. There is a study comparing the US AI adoption rate with the adoption rate of other countries. Since now we have go through and understand what might be a more realistic adoption rate, then let's talk about at least the behavior and the trend among these early adopters. So a few segmentation that I would like to go through with you. One is the education and income group. And then the next one will be the adopter trend between different genders. Let's start with education. If we look at only the IT tool usage, comparing the AI usage in 24th and the PC usage back in the 80s, you actually see the huge gap here. That's framed with something that immediately attracts your attention. Essentially, those who were in the position to start using computer as part of their work process back in the 80s were those who had a degree, but also those who were already work in the office. The tool they used before computer were typewriters. You've probably seen it in some of the old movies, or calculators, or those huge filing cabinets that you see in some of the World War II movies. Those were the tools they used before they started to use computer. It's really a quick productivity boost as soon as their business owner saw, hey, computer, this is a tool that can really help boost productivity of my team. Why don't we try to use it? It's a much easy adoption compared to those who have no college degree, might work in factories, on the field, or doing some more like hands-on work. So that was the reason you see this huge gap between computer in the 80s, that more bachelor degrees population has adopted computer much faster than those without a degree. And it's exactly the same as those who adopt AI early versus who don't adopt AI early. You get the point. So that was the education. And now is the income one. It's comparing which income group that you're in versus what is the probability of you using AI or computer on a daily basis. At the beginning, you see this very slow ramp up of the computer or AI usage. Sorry, I realized one thing. I haven't explained what the lines means. So the dashed line there is actually the computer usage back in 80s. It's also mapping with the income. The solid line there was the AI usage nowadays, also mapped with income. Now we can come back to what I was saying. So you see this slow ramp up, as in the higher the income group that you're in, the more likely that you start using computer back in the 80s, or more likely that you start to use AI nowadays, until this 80 percentile line. And then you saw this very steep drop. Let's talk about that 80 percentile first. So 80 percentile is equivalent to today annual salary in the US around 130,000 US dollar. So if you think about who are those people that earns higher than 130,000, are those people like I didn't make this up. I went to have a look at one of the US government database, and then realized it was a group of people who were either surgeon or lawyers or people managing capitals or small business owners. So you're essentially looking at those people not only taking wages anymore, but could be capital income, could be business profit, or could be like benefit from some other works they do. Most of them no longer do hands-on work. A lot of them manages people. they no longer need to process data themselves. For example, if they want a report, they will ask their team to come up with a report for them. So the need for that group of people to start using computer immediately back in the 80s or to start using AI immediately nowadays, it becomes much lower. That's one explanation. There's also another explanation. I'm not sure if it's the full truth, but I think it would be like partially explain this super steep drop. Is you need time to accumulate your career and to get experience. And by the time that you reach 80 percentile income group, more likely that you are around age late 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. There is another set of data that I don't have it here. The higher age you go, the likelihood you start to use AI drops. So that might also be another reason of this steep drop that you saw. All right, now we have covered the early adopter trend among different education and income. Let's talk a little bit about gender adoption gap. Although partly I do not agree with this categorization. I think a lot of times when it comes to a topic like this, it's not so fair if we just split by gender. It might mislead a topic. In this case, if you simply look at gender, you will be like, the gender inequality is getting higher because fewer women are adopting AI compared to men. In my opinion, I don't think that's the full case. Anyways, so if we time travel back again, 50 years ago, you would find more women held desk job compared to men. Majority of the women at that time, they were serving either as secretaries or admins, and men were either working factory or field. So it makes sense for women to start using it much earlier than those who were in the field. But even after we bring it back to today, if we talk about AI usage, if we look at what people do nowadays, here is a table that might provide with some explanation. The ones with blue cells are STEM subjects. The ones with green cells are commercial and business subjects. And the one with white are subjects that's neither STEM nor business. There are just more male who study or focus on the STEM subjects compared to female. Most subjects that female tends to pick or study on or are either nursing or theater or music. Those are the subject, and later on when you become a professional, those are the professions that you don't heavily rely on computer, and subsequently you wouldn't immediately find how AI will really help you boost your productivity. As opposed to if you work in STEM or if you work in business and commercial, you will immediately find the usage of AI. For example, if I work in commercial today, I would be like, hey, let me use ChatGPT to help me write a line of a social media post. That's the reason why you see this gender flip here, the flip of usage compared to the computer time. However, I'm not saying that this is the full story. Here's another study by a group of researchers in Denmark. What they look at here is essentially the ChatGPT usage among the Denmark population. This graph is comparing the ChatGPT usage behavior between male and female professions on specific types of roles. The first role was a software developer profession, and the second role is a marketing profession, and then you have journalists, you have IT support. But don't worry, first rule because that's the only example I'm going to use. So first rule is software developer, and that is the rule most people in the room are more familiar with. If we are comparing the behavior of using ChatGPT between male software developers and female software developers, you will realize that there are much more men using ChatGPT to help them with their day-to-day job compared to female. Furthermore, if you dive into another layer, you will see there are nearly 20% of men tend to pay for the Plus subscription, while less than 10% of female pay for their ChatGPT Plus subscription. Good thing is that there actually offers an explanation here. So there are two other graphs that I screenshot from the study. The one on your left-hand side is what people believe their ability when they use ChatGPT. The one on the right is the frictions that people think they have encountered when they use ChatGPT. It turns out more men are confident and believe that they're experts in using ChatGPT compared to women, whereas women are more conservative and feels more cautious when they use ChatGPT. So now we have learned about where AI is in the adoption distribution. We have also looked at the different trend among the early GAI adopter. So I'm just going to walk you through two observations that I have got after I read through the studies, and then I will open to questions. One is that I believe GAI, especially those end-user apps, are still in their infancies, and there are only early adopters like maybe you and I in this room that pay a lot of attention to it, especially when we think of the LLM underneath. It's a machine that is very good at predicting what your next word is, as opposed to a machine that actually has a logic. We will only start to see the mass adoption once the technology becomes more mature. The second observation, it's not 100% fair to say it's not because of the inequality. Sometimes that will come into play, but among early adopters, more often about what you do and what mindsets you have. Just to close up this talk, I'm working on another article reviewing a few papers on whether GAI-generated code is more efficient or is better than human-generated code. In short, that among those studies, they all find that GAI would generate much more code compared to humans in a specific time frame. But the second conclusion here is that comparing the GAI-generated code with human-generated code, you have 2 times as much of bugs or security loopholes. So I have this final question for you. A lot of people in this room are leaders in their organization. So when you're thinking to ask your team, start trying out ChatGPT or trying out other GAI tools, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Questions?
Thank you. Not really a question, just basically confirming what you said at the very end. We experimented a little bit with code generation in our software engineering, and the results were quite disappointing. So, didn't really help except for trivial tasks. At the moment, it's definitely not ready.
Yeah, I'm curious what else you found, because another thing I read in those studies is they found GAI Copilot helps junior much more.
If you have super inexperienced people, then it will help. But I mean, that's not really the type of person we would hire in the first place, to be honest. But what we also found is that it really likes to make up APIs, non-existing API calls. And as a programmer, you're like, yeah, sure, if that API call existed, this would be really easy to solve, but unfortunately it doesn't. Also, in terms of looking at SQL statements, you sometimes end up with SQL statements that if I had done this at university, I would probably have been thrown out of the course for being so inefficient. So that was really surprising. I would have thought that it would be much better at optimizing these things, but it's not.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for the insights on where we are on the adoption curve. I've been reading that there's been something like $600 billion invested in the training of these models so far. And people talk about the ROI gap for those who have invested and created those models. When the model's created, it's there and we can still use it. It's a bit like the railways in the 1840s. A lot of money lost, but infrastructure remaining value. Do you see a time frame where there will be real ROI in businesses from these tools? Or do you see a lot of those 600 billion invested in the building of this infrastructure evaporating and a lot of people taking a haircut?
So what do you mean by infrastructure here?
In this instance, the infrastructure would be a model, the weights, once they've been created, like a small language model, right? It might have taken 15, 20 million to build that, but the weights themselves exist and we can use it. Right. I'm not paying for the training, but if I have an open source model, I can still use the model.
I just wanted to clarify that you're not talking about data center or the energy facilities. First off, I'm not technical, so I just want to make my assumption here. Have you played with the old model rolled out by?
Yeah, I've tried.
So my understanding, chatbot on the top, commanding all those chatbots and gathering all the questions that they have in sequence. So that's how the O1 model came out. If that is really the case, then I think it might depend on if any of these types of solutions come out to resolve the problem that the current LLM is essentially very good at predicting your next words, instead of a tool that really understands how physics works in this world or understands logic. I don't know if this problem will be solved as soon as AI is integrated or as soon as there are more AI robots walking around our world, they might start to figure out what physics is in this world. Then would that solve the problem? I do not know. Another thing that we see a lot of corporate CEOs, I'm sorry if there's any corporate CEOs here, that they keep marketing their tools. They have a business that they need to sell. It's not saying that it's wrong and their tool is actually useful, but is it really that useful, or would it really boost productivity that much? You don't know yet. So it really depends.
So that slide's a really good question. This is probably more of a comment than a question, apologies. But I was just reflecting, following on from what Ian said, I was thinking about the laser, right? Because the laser was famously described as a solution for which there wasn't a problem, right? It was invented in this country, so of course we completely failed to exploit it. I was thinking that the thing that made the laser exploitable was actually fiber optic cable. I'm wondering if part of your thesis here in terms of where we are with this early first generation of large language model is whether there's something else lurking out there that's just slightly missing at the moment, and that's the bit that unlocks the real power of these tools. When you play with them, every now and then you get a glimpse of something really interesting and really powerful, but it's like sand, it falls through your hands more often than not, right? That's the same with you and your coding. I've seen brilliant coding, and I've seen absolute dreck. And I think that there's something else that filters out the poor quality stuff and really allows us to focus on building value generating things.
No, love it. Thank you very much for sharing. Do you think there is something else underneath that?
Ian was saying about the railways. Web 2.0 was built off the back of the dot-com boom, which was built off the back of lots of fibre optic and other cables that connected the world. Those people went bust putting in all those cables, but the Web 2.0 explosion came off the back of that because the infrastructure for networking became cheap because people were trying to get their money back. So, yeah, there's something there, I think.
If you're talking about the principle similar to standing on giants' shoulders, then yeah, that's exactly it. I do not think it's a waste spending all that money building an LLM. That's not what I was suggesting.
There is one possible take on this, and it is that the invention business and the IT industry usually got it wrong the first time. It's not the first innovation wave that made the money. It's some sort of usage of that innovation that clicked something into a finished product. I think what we're seeing now is that the current AI models are really a raw product, and all this typing and you have to repeat it, and there needs to be more work done. I agree with you that it's into the future where we get a product fit, and we need to see these products closer into the tools we use today and possible some new tools. But there's so much accidental innovation out there, and today's current, with the hallucination and everything, it feels to be such an early and raw product. But I think that there's something else out there that is going to be the big one. We need this current wave, and we need to work on it to get there, but there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be losing a lot of money before we're there. Yeah, and also the theft problem needs to be sorted out. I sincerely hope for all of us that somehow we're going to be able to sort that out. We can't live in a world where you can get incredibly rich just by stealing.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious about when you're making the product fit comparisons and you say AI adoption rate. Are you talking about ChatGPT specifically, or was that curve all of AI?
It depends on which study. The first few figures until the education, income, and the gender differences were from one study. They focus on any GAI apps, including ChatGPT, Midjourney, and a Microsoft Copilot. But the second study only focused on ChatGPT.
I ask because all of AI is kind of ubiquitous right now throughout almost any product that we use in our. I don't think that users know that they're adopting AI when they adopt AI. It's nearly universal in everything we're using. There's some synapse firing that's using these algorithms, and the products that we've had the most success with combine the different techniques and tools and use them together. Instead of forcing Gen AI into, you have the right tools talking to each other, it creates an ecosystem effect of higher quality that speaks more to what AI is than just ChatGPT. Have you seen studies that show that type of comparison? Light was one of the products, and I feel like AI is more at that level. AI in general, all the tools that compose AI are more of a comparator to Light in general than maybe ChatGPT, and I'm wondering, have you seen anything that compares it at that level?
I think it's a very interesting thought. That data probably could be found in more an industrial report, like from Accenture or from PwC. Those kinds of reports, they would tell, like commercial-wise, do people really tell the difference of AI is already as part of the system or just generative AI end-user apps like ChatGPT. To be fair, like when I was a product lead in Just Eat Takeaway, that because I was leading a few internal operation teams. One of the projects that we were working on, I already left more than a year ago, so I can talk about it. One of the products I was working on was essentially to figure out how to use Gen AI to make customer support's life much easier because there's always more tickets than the support themselves.